Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to share with you a tutorial on how to paint white fur in watercolour, using this sweet little Westie as our subject. I'll be focusing on simplifying the process to make it easier and more fun to paint. I've got lots to show you. For this painting, I chose a limited palette of 3 colours to achieve colour harmony. I used a triadic colour scheme, which involves 3 colours evenly spaced around the colour wheel. I chose Winsor Red, Winsor Yellow, and Winsor Blue green shade. These colours provided a vibrant and balanced mix. I've talked about the value in using a limited palette in other videos, and the triadic colour scheme really helps to keep the painting cohesive and visually interesting. The paper I used was Arches cold press watercolour paper, and here's my reference photo of the little Westie. With all that white fur, it might look a bit intimidating at first, but don't worry, I've got some helpful hints and tips to make painting it a lot less daunting. Before we dive into the painting, I need to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is a fantastic platform with a wide range of creative classes, and one that I think you'll find especially useful is called Photograph Your Pet, One Muse, Endless Possibilities by Andrew Knapp. This class is perfect for anyone looking to improve their pet photography skills, which can be incredibly helpful for getting those perfect reference photos for your artwork. Andrew teaches you how to create stunning theme-based photo series with your pets. Taking clear, well-lit photos can make a huge difference in your artwork, and Andrew's class is packed with tips and techniques to help you achieve that. I've been using some of Andrew's tips to take photos of Leo that I hope to paint from. If you haven't heard of Skillshare before, it's the largest online learning community for creative people. They offer thousands of classes led by industry experts across lots of different fields like film, illustration, design, productivity, and lots more. I have published 14 watercolour classes myself on Skillshare, all of them covering different subjects and techniques that you can practice, so be sure to check them out when you're there. If you haven't had a look at Skillshare yet, now's the perfect time. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So get started today and see how Skillshare can help you grow your skills and passions. Okay, let's have a look at this painting now. For this painting, I wanted to include the fine hairs around the edge of the dog. Since it's a white dog on white paper, I decided to add some background colour to make it stand out. Using masking fluid allowed me to create a free-flowing background, and I was really happy with the result. It blended perfectly without any fuss. I'll show you that in a minute. So here's my first tip for painting long fur. If you need to use masking fluid, use a liner brush with long bristles. I'm using an inexpensive Taklon script liner. It's a number 1. Its long bristles really helped me create those beautiful flowing fine lines of fur along the edge of the dog. I mentioned I used just 3 colours for this painting, red, yellow and blue. I needed a cool grey-blue colour for the dog and also the background. So here on my little palette, I've got a squirt of Winsor Red and the Winsor Blue green shade, roughly the same amount of each. And I'll mix them together to create a muted violet. So I kept mixing until I had something that looked like violet. You can get some beautiful greys when you mix complementary colours. Yellow is the complementary to violet. So I thought if I take a little bit of the yellow and mix it with the violet, hopefully that will start to give me grey. So this is Winsor Yellow that I'm mixing in with the other 2 colours. I had to add a little bit more of the red to my mixture until I got a colour that I was happy with. And then I mixed some water into it as well. And then I got this blue-grey colour that I thought would work well both on the background and also on the dog. Then I wet the background with water and I used some of that colour to start painting it in. I used a large flat brush to paint it in quickly. I also lifted my board off the table to make the paint flow where I wanted it. I also painted this colour on the left side of the dog. And again, I picked the board up and allowed the paint to flow. Gave it a helping hand with the brush sometimes. I've got plenty of water on my paper here. And even though I'm using the thicker paper, I did stretch it before I painted because I find it gets a bow in it if I don't stretch it. Before I start painting the dog, I want to highlight how I've simplified the fur into key shapes in the line drawing. Breaking down the fur into larger, manageable shapes like this can help make the painting process smoother. It also aids in maintaining the clarity and readability of the painting, making it more visually appealing from a distance as well as close up. So that's another tip for you. When you're looking at your reference photo, try slightly blurring your eyes. This helps you see the distinct larger shapes in the fur. Don't focus on each individual hair. Instead, have a look at how the fur clumps together to form larger shapes. Shift your perspective from seeing it as fur to seeing it as a collection of shapes. So here, I'm using the grey that I mixed for the background and I'm painting in that large shape at the base of the dog on dry paper. I'm not looking at individual hair here, I'm just looking at that grey shape that I can see on the reference photo. Then I started to paint in some more of those grey shapes on the dry paper. And here's the head before I started painting it. Can you see how I've tried to simplify the fur into key shapes? I'm going to show you how I painted that, but first I need to take off the masking fluid from around the edges. I've mixed a warmer grey from the blue and the red, but I've used more of the red. Here I'm wetting the paper with water, but my brush has got a bit of paint in it from when I mixed the two colours together. So all I want to do is paint an area of water so that when I paint that lighter, warmer grey on, I'll have soft edges around the outside of the mark that I'm making. So just here, when I look at the reference photo, I can see a pale grey, sort of a triangular shape around the eye. And that's what I'm painting in there. I'm not looking at any detail. When I look at the reference photo, I blur my eyes. I've painted in a few more key shapes that I can see. Here I'm painting in that grey area that sits underneath the chin and onto the neck. So I'm ignoring all the individual little clumps of hair that I can see, and I'm just painting in that grey shape that sits on the neck. To add warmth to this area, I mixed Winsor Red with Winsor Yellow to make an orange, and I charged that colour onto the wet grey paint. And then I even dropped in some of the red on its own. Not too dark though. And I left that to dry. I did the same thing here on the grey area underneath the collar. I painted a light wash of the grey, and then while it was wet, I painted some yellow and orange, just using some creative license here. I continued in this way all over the dog, painting the key shapes loosely. Most of it I painted on dry paper. I painted in the little eye there, and on this side you can't see the eye. So I've got some Winsor Blue here, and I've wet the grey area, and I'm just painting the blue in between the little hairs that I had the masking fluid on. So the masking fluid's not there anymore. I'm also using some grey, just adding a bit of definition on this side. This is my 0 brush that I'm using, so it's a small brush. I'm working on dry paper. I look at the reference photo and I try to follow the natural direction of the fur with my brush strokes. And that helps to create realistic texture and flow. Trying not to get lost in the detail. I can see some grey areas on these little hairs on the side, so I paint some of the grey there as well, which pushes them back a little. And all the colours are really quite light at this stage. To add more interest to this eye area, I layer another light wash of paint over the top of the first layer. This time I'm using more of the Winsor Blue. And this is the grey that I mixed. I'm also trying to keep brush strokes to a minimum. I don't need to paint in every single little hair that I see. I'm suggesting the hair rather than painting it all in. The colours I'm using now are slightly darker as well. I'm working over the top of those areas that I painted in at the start, adding some more definition to them. I paint on dry paper mainly, and then I can soften paint edges where I think I need to. I painted the nose and mouth, and then I decided to turn my attention to the chaos of hair on the chin and under the neck. I wanted to put some detail in here, but I didn't want to overwork the area, so I was wary of that. I had some masking fluid under the mouth on the fine hairs there, so I was able to wash some black onto that area easily. The black is a mixture of all 3 colours. I removed the masking fluid on the chin and I drew some pencil lines in to create the clumps of hair there. Then I painted them in negatively. So by that I mean I painted the area around the clumps of hair rather than the clumps of hair themselves. And I did the same thing here on the neck. I drew in a few directional lines to guide me, and then I painted negatively on the neck. I'm doing that here as well, although this time instead of using grey paint, I'm using orange, and I'm painting around the clumps of hair. When that dried, I came back with my 0 brush, the smallest one, and I added a bit more definition. With this patch of fur on the front, I started working on dry paper. So here the paper is dry, and then as I went further up I decided to wet the paper and keep the paint edges soft. So here I'm wetting it with some water. I thought if I paint this area on the wet paper, then later on, if I think I need to, I can come back and add a bit more definition on the dry paper. Then I went down to this area of fur at the bottom, and I decided to continue the negative painting technique where I painted the spaces around the clumps of fur. This took quite a bit of time. I was working on dry paper. I'm still using the grey mixture, but it's a bit darker than that initial wash that I put on there. So you can see I'm painting around the little strands of fur. I've sped this up because it's quite time-consuming and monotonous, and I think it's easier to see what I'm doing when you can see it coming to life faster. So all I'm doing is painting those areas around the hair, and I'm leaving the lighter colour showing, which forms the hair itself. I'm also trying not to paint every single thing that I see, using the reference photo as a guide. So all of this area was painted negatively. Here I've mixed some darker grey and I'm adding some more little clumps of hair over the top of the previous layer. It took a while. I spent probably about an hour or so painting this area. And I knew that I could come back later at the end of the painting and add some white gouache over the top in a few places if I felt it needed it. So there I dropped some of the Winsor Blue onto the grey paint. After that area was painted in, I turned my attention back to the leg and the side of the dog. So I'm using my zero brush here and some grey paint, and I'm painting on dry paper. Just a few little directional strokes here and there. There I've mixed a bit of the Winsor Red into the grey paint. So here I'm painting in the darker areas that I see there on the reference photo. I'm on dry paper, still using my little tiny brush. I've mixed a really dark grey here from the red and the blue. It's got more of the blue in the mixture. And as I look at the reference photo, my eyes are blurred. I'm thinking of it as shapes rather than fur. So I'm painting in the shapes that I see. I'm basically paying attention to where the shadows fall, which helps to define the fur and make it look a bit more realistic. I follow the contours of the fur as well. It's important to be patient when you're doing this. This is my palette, and this is the black that I mixed. It's a mixture of all three colours, but I'm using fresh pigment, so I've got a lot of pigment on my brush. I've kept the water out of the mixture. I used that mixture on the nose and the mouth and around the eye, and here I'm using it on the pads. After I painted them in, I felt that they were a bit dark, so I waited until they were dry. I wet them with my brush, with some water on my brush, and I used a tissue to take a bit of paint off. They were standing out too much and I could see that I had them too dark. So that's water, and then the tissue blots it off. After everything was finished, I started to use some white gouache for finer details and to soften some of the edges. So when you are painting fur, my advice is to preserve your whites. You can do that with masking fluid where you need to, or just avoid painting them. Use light washes at first. Don't go too dark too quickly. Work from broad to specific, so don't get lost in the detail. Look for shapes in the fur where the shadows are and paint those in first, like I did here in this painting. Watch the direction of your strokes. Follow the flow of the fur with your brush. Build up your layers slowly. There's no rush. Start with the light layer and then gradually add those darker tones. I didn't use the dry brush technique in this painting, but consider using a dry brush technique for large areas of fur. Vary the colours of the fur. This is a white dog, But I've used warm tones, yellows, oranges, and even reds. So don't be afraid to use colour and have fun with it. Watch your edges. Have a mixture of hard and soft edges. You can work on wet paper in places or have a damp brush ready to soften your paint marks. Pay attention to where the shadows fall. They're important. They help to form the shape of the animal and also the flow of the fur. And most importantly, be patient. Let your layers dry. It takes time. This painting took me all day, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And there it is, cut off the board. I hope you found the tips in this video helpful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Today I want to share with you a tutorial on... Is my hair here hanging down? I can see it. Which involves 3 colours evenly spaced around the colour wheel.
You're a ninja.
Should I do that?
No.
I just talk about it.
You can do it evenly spaced, but don't put it under your head. Do it
So,
on your chest. Just evenly spaced.
So,
Or just evenly spaced around. Just do it, yeah.
Even.
Don't cover your face, just around your chest. Or to the side. Not too far to the side.
For this painting, I chose a limited palette of 3 colours to achieve... I'll try again. 3 colours to achieve colour harmony. Harmony.
You've got 3 colours in your collar.
Harmony. For this... I just spat.
So it got me in the face.
These colours provided a vibrant and balanced mixed.